Manuel Rivera had just come back from the field when a neighbor stopped at the fence and said, "Richard Caldwell invited you to the tractor pulling challenge. He said in front of everyone that he wants to see you in that 1912 junk there. He said it will be funny to watch the old man trying to pull weight against his monster." Richard's tractor was an impressive machine. 1,000 horsepower, air-conditioned cabin, touchscreen display, and an engine so powerful that people would stop on the road just to look. They called it the Monster. Manuel stayed quiet, wiping his hands on the dirty rag. The neighbor went on. He laughed when he said your name, called you the town joke. Carlos, who was nearby, heard everything. Manuel didn't say a word. He just looked toward the shed where the rusty old tractor was waiting. His name was Manuel Rivera. He was 53 years old. He lived on a small farm outside San Antonio, Texas. Just him and his son, Carlos, who was 11. Manuel's wife had passed away when Carlos was only 3. 8 years raising a boy alone. 8 years of early mornings and late nights. 8 years of callous hands and quiet prayers. Manuel wasn't the kind of man who complained. He'd wake up before the sun, put on his worn-out boots, and walk out to the field. The air was still cool. The birds hadn't started yet. And there it was, standing in the old shed like a stubborn old friend, his tractor. A 1912 steam tractor, rusted on every edge, loud as a thunderstorm, and leaking somewhere every single day. People in town called it the relic. Some called it that junk. But Manuel called it the old man. Because somehow, no matter how bad things looked, that machine still started, still moved, still worked. Just like him, Carlos used to sit on the fence and watch his dad work. He'd see the steam shoot up, hear the groan of old metal, and smile. To him, that tractor wasn't ugly. It was magic. One evening, Carlos asked, "Dad, why don't you buy a new one?" Manuel wiped the grease off his hand with a rag and looked at his son. "Because this one still has heart," he said. And Carlos didn't fully understand it then, but he would, very soon. The Rivera farm was 22 acres of dry Texas soil. It wasn't easy land. Rocks hid under every row. The heat in summer could crack the ground open. But Manuel had worked it for nearly 20 years. He knew every dip, every slope, every stubborn corner that flooded when it rained. He'd learned it all from his own father, who'd learned it from his. Farming wasn't just a job for Manuel. It was a language, a conversation with the earth that most people never had. The 1912 tractor had been in the family since his grandfather's time. It ran on steam, which meant it needed water and would keep going. Every morning, Manuel would load it, fire it up, and wait for the pressure to build. It was slow. It was loud. But once it got moving, it didn't stop. His neighbors had newer machines. Most of them had updated years ago. Big green tractors with GPS systems and air-conditioned cabs. Manuel couldn't afford those. He'd tried once to get a loan at the bank in town. The man behind the desk looked at his papers, then looked at him and said the numbers didn't work. Manuel thanked him, drove home, and went back to work. No bitterness, no drama, just work. That was his way. Carlos watched all of this. Every rejection, every struggle, every sunset where his dad came in dirty and tired, but never broken. And without knowing it, Carlos was learning something school could never teach him. About 3 miles down the road, there was another farm, and it was nothing like Manuel's. It belonged to a man named Richard Caldwell, 51 years old, rich in a way that felt loud. He'd inherited money from his father, then doubled it in real estate. He bought the farm not because he loved farming, but because he liked owning things. He had 4 employees, 2 dogs that cost more than Manuel's truck, and a brand new tractor that made people stop their cars on a highway just to look. They called it the Monster. 1,000 horsepower, touchscreen controls, heated seat, climate control. It could plow a field twice the size of Manuel's in under 2 hours. Richard loved showing it off. He'd take visitors out to field and let the machine roar just to see their faces. He had no patience for old things. If it doesn't perform, replace it was his motto. He'd said about cars, about business partners, about employees. He said it about people too, though not always out loud. Richard had heard about Manuel and the old steam tractor. He'd seen it once from the road, coughing and sputtering along a row. He'd laughed, actually laughed out loud to nobody, just because the image struck him as ridiculous. A man using a machine from over 100 years ago in the modern world. He didn't see stubbornness. He didn't see loyalty. He only saw someone who hadn't kept up. And that, to Richard Caldwell, was the worst thing a person could be. The town of Castroville was a kind of place where everybody knew everybody. The diner on Main Street had the same menu for 30 years. The hardware store was run by the same family, since before anyone could remember. And news traveled fast, very fast. So when Richard Caldwell started telling people about his plan, it didn't take long for the whole town to know. He was going to hold a challenge, a tractor pull, on his land, open to anyone. The idea was simple. Attach heavy weights to a sled and see which tractor could drag it the farthest. Most people assumed it was just a show, a reason for Richard to park his monster in front of a crowd and watch it win. But then he said something that changed the whole story. He said, "I'm inviting that Rivera fella and his antique." Someone told Manuel about the invitation the same afternoon. Carlos was doing homework at the kitchen table when his dad came in from the field. He sat down slowly, poured a glass of water, and stared at the table for a moment. "What's wrong, Dad?" Carlos asked. Manuel shook his head. "Nothing's wrong." But Carlos had lived with this man his whole life. He knew the difference between nothing and something. "Is it about the challenge?" Carlos asked. Manuel looked up. "Who told you?" "Everybody knows," the boy said. Manuel was quiet for a long time. Then he got up, went to the window, and looked out at the old shed. The tractor sat in the dark, silent, waiting. Manuel didn't sleep much that night. He lay on his back and stared at the ceiling fan going around and around. He wasn't scared of losing. He'd lost before. He'd lost crops to drought, money to bad seasons, sleep to worry, and his wife to sickness. Losing wasn't new to him. What made him uneasy was something else. It was being made into a joke. He was a private man. He didn't need people's admiration. But he also didn't want his son to watch the whole town laugh at their family name. At 3 a.m, he got up, made coffee, and walked out to the shed. He opened the old wooden doors and looked at the tractor in the moonlight, rust and all. He ran his hand along the side of it the way you'd touch an old photograph, slow and careful. "What do you think, old man?" he said quietly. The tractor didn't answer, of course, but something in the silence felt like an answer anyway. By 4 a.m, Manuel had made his decision. He would enter the challenge, not to prove anything to Richard Caldwell, not to impress the town, but because backing down wasn't in his blood. His father hadn't backed down. His grandfather hadn't backed down, and he wasn't going to either. He went back inside, drank the rest of his coffee, and wrote a note on a napkin. Just 2 words. "We're going." He left it on the table for Carlos to find in the morning. When the boy woke up and read it, he didn't say a word. He just smiled so wide it filled the whole kitchen. The news spread through Castroville like wildfire. Manuel Rivera and his 1912 steam tractor had accepted the challenge. Some people laughed. Others shook their heads. A few older folks, the ones who'd known Manuel's father, nodded slowly like they'd expected nothing less. At the diner, opinions were strong and loud. "That old machine is going to fall apart on the way there," said one man over eggs and toast. "It's embarrassing, honestly," said another. "Someone should talk some sense into him." But Rosa Mendoza, who was 67 and had run the diner for over 30 years, slapped a rag on the counter and said, "Let the man run his own race." And nobody argued with Rosa. She had that kind of voice. Carlos heard what people were saying at school. Some kids teased him. One boy said, "Your dad's tractor is in a museum, not a race." Carlos didn't fight. He didn't cry. He went home that afternoon, changed clothes, and walked straight to the shed. "I want to help," he told his father. Manuel handed him a wrench without a word. That evening, the two of them worked side by side in the fading light, tightening bolts, checking pressure valves, cleaning the boiler. Manuel showed his son every piece of that machine with the patience of a teacher, not just how it worked, but why. This part here, Manuel said, pointing to a thick steel rod. This is what carries the load. If this holds, everything holds. Carlos looked at it carefully. How do you know it'll hold, Dad? Manuel wiped grease from his forehead. Because it's held for over 100 years. And I've never given it a reason to quit. 3 days before the challenge, something unexpected happened. A young reporter from a local TV station in San Antonio showed up at Manuel's gate. Her name was Diana Flores. 29 years old, sharp eyes, recorder in hand. Mr. Rivera, she said, I heard about the challenge. Would you be willing to talk? Manuel looked at her for a moment. He wasn't the kind of man who talked to cameras. But something about her energy felt honest. Come in, he said. They sat at the kitchen table. Carlos stayed nearby, pretending to do homework, but listening to every word. Diana asked about the tractor, about the challenge, about why a man with a machine from 1912 would go up against 1,000 horsepower. Manuel thought before he answered. Then he said, You know what my father told me when I was Carlos's age? He said, It's not the size of the engine that matters. It's who's driving it. Diana wrote that down fast. And what do you hope happens? She asked. Manuel looked out the window toward the shed. I hope my son sees that there's no shame in fighting with what you have. Diana nodded slowly. She glanced at Carlos, who was pretending very hard to read a textbook. She smiled. Can I film the tractor? She asked. Sure, Manuel said. They walked out to the shed. When Diana saw it, she went quiet for a second. Then she turned to her cameraman and said, Get all of it. The story aired the next evening on the 6 o'clock news. And by morning, people far beyond Castroville knew the name Manuel Rivera. And they knew about the old man, the rusted tractor, and the challenge that nobody thought he could win. Richard Caldwell saw the news story from his living room couch. He watched it with a glass of wine in his hand, and a look on his face that was hard to read. At first he smirked. The camera had made Manuel and his farm look almost poetic, which wasn't what Richard expected from a local news crew. He'd expected them to see what he saw, an outdated man clinging to an outdated machine. Instead, the reporter had made it look like something worth watching. By the end of the segment, Richard set down his wine glass. He didn't like the feeling rising in his chest. It wasn't anger exactly. It was something closer to discomfort, like when a conversation goes a direction you didn't plan. His phone buzzed. A friend texting, This guy's going to be a hero even if he loses. Richard typed back, He's going to lose? But he stared at the screen for a while after. The next morning, he drove out to his equipment barn and stood in front of the monster. 1,000 horsepower, $600,000 of steel, technology, and engineering. It was a masterpiece of modern machinery. It had never lost a pull. Not once. Richard walked around it slowly, running a hand along its side. Don't embarrass me, he said to it quietly, which was strange, he thought, talking to a machine, like it had feelings, like it cared. He shook the thought off and walked back to the house. He had calls to make, guests to invite, a crowd to impress. The challenge was in 3 days, and Richard Caldwell was not a man who lost in front of an audience. The night before the challenge, Manuel and Carlos stayed in the shed until almost 10 o'clock. The old tractor was as ready as it could be. The boiler had been cleaned out twice. Every bolt had been checked and rechecked. The pressure valves were set. The wood was dry and stacked in the trailer. Manuel sat on a crate and wiped his hands on a rag for probably the 20th time that evening. Carlos sat on the ground next to him, leaning against the big rear wheel. Dad, the boy said, Are you nervous? Manuel thought about it honestly. A little, he admitted. Carlos nodded. Me too. They sat in silence for a while. The crickets were loud outside. The smell of old grease and sawdust and dry grass filled the shed. It was a smell Carlos would remember for the rest of his life. What if we don't win? Carlos asked. Manuel looked at his son, really looked at him, the way fathers do when they want a moment to last. Then we don't win, he said simply, but we'll have showed up, and we'll have done it with what we have. That's all anyone can ever do. Carlos pulled his knees up to his chest. Some kids at school said we're going to get laughed at. Manuel nodded slowly. Maybe, but you know what I've learned about laughter? The people who laugh the loudest are usually the ones who never tried anything hard. Carlos was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm proud of you, Dad. Manuel reached over and put a hand on the boy's shoulder. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Some moments speak louder than words ever could. The morning of the challenge, the sky over Castroville was a deep orange and pink. The kind of sunrise that makes you stop whatever you're doing and just look. Manuel was up at 5. Coffee on, boots on, hat on. Carlos came down the stairs at 5:15, still rubbing sleep from his eyes, but dressed and ready. They hitched the tractor to the trailer, without much talking. The old machine loaded slowly, groaning as always, like it was making a formal complaint about being moved. But it loaded. By 6:30, they were on the road. As they drove through town, a few people were already out on their porches. Some waved. A man at the gas station gave a thumbs up. An elderly woman in front of the pharmacy pressed her hands together like a small prayer as they passed. Carlos watched all of it from the passenger window. People are rooting for us, he said. Some of them, Manuel agreed, that's enough. When they pulled into Caldwell's property, the scene was already something else. Trucks and cars parked across the wide flat field. Folding chairs set up in rows. A food stand selling coffee and breakfast tacos. Maybe 200 people already there, and more arriving by the minute. Richard Caldwell stood near the monster with a group of men in clean ranch shirts. He saw Manuel's truck and trailer and said something to the group. They all turned to look. A couple of them smiled. Not kind smiles. Manuel parked, got out slowly and stretched. He didn't look at Caldwell. He looked at the field. Good flat ground. Long and straight. He nodded to himself. We can work with this, he said quietly. The rules were simple. Each tractor would pull a weighted sled. The sled started with 2,000 pounds. After each round, more weight was added. The tractor that pulled the farthest total distance won. There would be 3 judges, and every pull would be measured to the inch. The event coordinator, a stocky man named Gerald, went over everything with both competitors side by side. Manuel listened carefully. Richard Caldwell stood with his arms crossed, barely paying attention. He'd done events like this before. He didn't need instructions. When Gerald finished, Richard leaned toward Manuel and said, low enough that only he could hear, "You sure you want to do this? I can still find a reason to send you home gracefully." Manuel looked at him calmly. "No, thank you," he said. Richard smiled. "Suit yourself." Carlos had been standing just behind his father. He'd heard every word. His jaw tightened. But Manuel put a hand on the boy's arm, without even looking back. A quiet signal. Stay steady. The crowd was growing. Diana Flores from the news station had come back with a bigger crew this time. 2 cameras. A drone. The story had gotten bigger overnight. People had shared online. Some comments were cruel. Many were hopeful. A few were from people as far away as Oklahoma and New Mexico, who said they'd be watching the live stream. Manuel didn't know about any of that. He was focused on one thing, getting the old man ready. He climbed up on the tractor, opened the firebox, and began loading wood, slow and steady. Carlos stood below, handing up pieces one at a time. They worked without a word, like a team that had been doing this for years. Because they had. Richard Caldwell went first. The monster rolled onto the field, and the crowd pulled back instinctively, like they were watching something that could hurt them. The engine sound was enormous. A low, deep throb that you felt in your chest more than heard with your ears. The sled was attached. The signal was given, and the monster launched forward like something unleashed. It pulled the 2,000-pound sled the full length of the course without a single hesitation. The crowd erupted. People were on their feet. Caldwell's employees cheered loudly. Richard himself sat up high in the cab, one hand resting on the wheel like he was barely trying. The monster was moved to a second position. More weight was added. For 1,000 pounds now. The signal was given again. Again it moved. Smooth. Powerful. Unstoppable. The crowd noise built. Gerald measured the distance carefully. The monster had cleared the full course again. A perfect run. Richard stepped out of the cab and took off his hat, giving the crowd a small bow. Some people laughed and clapped. Others looked toward the other end of the field, where Manuel was still getting the steam tractor ready. The boiler pressure was building. Manuel could hear it. A steady hiss, then a deeper groan, then the first real push of steam pressure registering on the old gauge. He tapped it twice with one finger. The needle held. "Almost," he said to Carlos. "Almost." Carlos stood on the ground watching the gauge like it was the most important thing in the world. Because right now it was... When Manuel's name was called, the crowd went quiet in a way that felt unusual. Not respectful quiet. More like the kind of quiet that comes before people watch something fall. A few people near the back were already recording on their phones. Diana Flores had her crew focused. The old steam tractor rolled onto the field slowly. Every step of its movement was visible, mechanical, honest. Nothing hidden. No sleek body panels. Just iron and steam, and a man in a worn hat sitting on top. A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd. A child somewhere said loudly, "Is that thing even running?" His mother hushed him quickly. Manuel brought the tractor into position. He lined it up with the sled. He could feel the pressure under him, vibrating through the seat, through his legs, all the way up into his chest. He reached down and touched the valve, adjusted it slightly. He looked at the course ahead, long and flat. He looked at the sled behind him, 2,000 pounds. He looked at Carlos standing at the edge of the field, hands at his sides, chin up. The signal was given. Manuel opened the steam valve. The old machine did not launch. It did not roar. It groaned, deep and low and heavy. And then, slowly it moved. The crowd watched in silence. The sled began to shift, inch by inch at first, then foot by foot. The tractor moved forward with every rotation of its enormous old wheels. Not fast, but steady, honest, grinding. And it did not stop. When it crossed the finish line, there was a pause of about 3 full seconds. And then the crowd exploded. Gerald and the 2 other judges measured carefully. They walked the course twice, checked their clipboards, compared notes. The crowd was buzzing. Richard Caldwell watched from near his truck, arms crossed, jaw tight. His expression had changed since the morning. The easy confidence had been replaced by something more careful, more calculating. When Gerald announced that the steam tractor had matched the monster's distance exactly on the first pull, the crowd erupted again, not politely, loudly, with actual feeling behind it. Carlos had both fists raised above his head. He didn't even realize it until someone next to him laughed. Manuel stepped off the tractor and checked the machine carefully. He walked all the way around it, crouching to look underneath. He ran his hand along the boiler drum. Everything was holding. He made one small adjustment to a pressure fitting, then reloaded the firebox with more wood. More weight coming. Carlos told him as he jogged over. "I know," Manuel said calmly. "How are we doing?" Carlos asked. Manuel stood up and looked at his son. "We're still standing," he said. "That's how we're doing." For the next round, 6,000 pounds were loaded onto the sled. Gerald announced it to the crowd. A few people near the front went, "Oh," like it was already too much to ask. Richard Caldwell went first again. The monster took the weight without complaint. Another full course. Another perfect run. The bar was set. Manuel climbed back up onto the tractor, settled into the seat, and fed more wood into the fire. The gauge climbed. The steam built, and the old man waited. The 6,000-pound pull was the hardest thing that tractor had attempted in years, possibly decades. Manuel could feel it in the way the machine moved. Slower, more labored. The steam pressure had to work harder to translate into movement. But Manuel knew this machine. He knew how to read it. He knew the sounds it made when it was struggling, and the sounds it made when it was finding its rhythm. He kept his hand on the valve, adjusting in tiny increments, not forcing it, guiding it, the way you guide a horse that's tired but willing. The crowd was standing. All of them, even people who come expecting to laugh. The tractor moved through the first third of the course with painful slowness. Carlos stood at the finish line, both hands pressed against his face. He didn't breathe. Around him, Strangers were watching with the same held breath. At the halfway point, the tractor hitched, just slightly, a moment where the wheels spun without traction for just a second. The crowd gasped. Manuel didn't panic. He eased the valve back, let the pressure stabilize, and opened it again. The traction returned. The tractor found its footing, and it kept going. When it crossed the finish line, Carlos let out a sound that was half shout, half sob. He ran toward the tractor, and Manuel stepped off. An 11-year-old boy wrapped his arms around his father's waist like he hadn't done since he was much smaller. Manuel put one hand on the back of his son's head and held him there for a moment. The judges measured. The tractor had matched the monster again. Exactly. The challenge was tied. Welcome to Addictive Stories, where real life hits harder than any script. What you're about to see next is the moment nobody in Castroville, Texas will ever forget, because tied after 3 rounds meant one thing: a final pull, one shot, winner take all. Gerald announced it to the crowd, and the field went electric. People were calling friends on their phones, telling them to watch the live stream. A vendor ran out of coffee and started giving away free because people weren't moving from their spots. Richard Caldwell pulled his main mechanic aside and spoke to him quietly. The mechanic nodded twice, walked to the monster, and made an adjustment to the engine management system. It was technically within the rules. No one protested, but everyone noticed. Manuel saw it too. He didn't say anything. He walked to the water barrel they brought and refilled the tractor's boiler. He checked the wood supply. He had enough for 1 strong run, maybe 1.5. He would need to use it wisely. Carlos brought him a sandwich wrapped in foil. "Mom packed this," Manuel said without thinking. Then he caught himself. He looked at the foil in his hands. Carlos looked at him. "I made it," the boy said quietly. "I used a recipe." Manuel looked up at his son. He didn't trust himself to speak for a second. He took a breath. "Thank you," he said. "It's good." They sat side by side on the trailer for 10 minutes and ate in silence. Around them, 200 people buzzed and argued and predicted and speculated. But inside that small circle, it was just a father and a son sitting together before the hardest thing. The final weight was 8,000 pounds. Gerald announced it, and there was an audible reaction from the crowd. Even some of Caldwell's supporters looked unsure. Nobody had pulled 8,000 pounds in an event like this in years. Not around here. Richard went first. The monster loaded up, revved, and launched. It was a thing of absolute mechanical violence. The sled moved like it weighed nothing. The crowd roared. The full course. Clean. Dominant. Richard's crew cheered and slapped each other on the backs. The man himself climbed out of the cab and looked across the field toward Manuel. Their eyes met for just a moment. Richard said nothing. He didn't need to. The machine had spoken for him. Manuel stood beside the steam tractor and looked at the sled. 8,000 pounds. More than 4 times the weight of his truck. He thought about his grandfather, who'd built the first shed on this land by hand, 1 board at a time. He thought about his father, who'd plowed in the rain and planted in drought. He thought about his wife, and the way she'd always said that strength wasn't about muscle. It was about not stopping. He climbed onto the tractor. He opened the firebox one more time and loaded the last of the wood. The gauge climbed. Steam hissed from the fittings. The machine trembled beneath him, like a living thing waking up from a long sleep. Carlos stood at the finish line 100 feet away. His arms were at his sides. His chin was up. He did not look afraid. He looked exactly like his father. And Manuel saw it, and it made him steady. The signal was given. Manuel opened the valve. The tractor leaned into the weight. 8,000 pounds of resistance pushed back against a 100-year-old engine, a tired man, and a lifetime of not giving up. The crowd went completely, absolutely silent. Not the polite silence of respect. The silence of people holding their breath because they don't want to make a sound and break something. The rear wheels of the tractor fought for grip in the dry dirt. For 3 long seconds, it looked like the tractor wasn't going to move. Just a sound of steam and a groan of old iron and the faint creak of the sled shifting under the weight. Then the wheels bit and the tractor moved. 1 foot, 3 feet, 5 feet. The sled was coming with it. Slowly, agonizingly, honestly. Manuel's hand was steady on the valve. His eyes were straight ahead. He was not looking at the crowd. He was not looking at Caldwell. He was looking at his son, standing at the other end of the course, waiting. 20 feet. 30. The tractor hitched again. The wheels slipped. The crowd inhaled sharply. Manuel made the adjustment. The valve back, hold, forward. The wheels caught. The sled moved again. 50 feet. 60. Carlos had both hands pressed flat against his chest now, like he was trying to hold his own heart inside his ribs. 80 feet. The finish line was 20 feet away. The steam pressure gauge was in the red zone. The boiler was giving everything it had. Every bolt, every joint, every weld made by some unknown craftsman over 100 years ago. 90 feet. 10 feet left. 9 feet. 8. 7. The tractor crossed the finish line. It crossed it slowly, still pulling, steam still pushing, wheels still turning. And then Manuel eased a valve closed. The tractor slowed to a stop. The steam settled. The crowd did nothing for about 3 full seconds. And then it erupted, not politely, not with applause, with noise, real, uncontrolled, joyful noise. People were standing on their chairs. Someone's hat flew into the air. A group of older men near the back, ranchers who'd been farming this land their whole lives, started shouting like they were 20 years old. Diana Flores had tears in her eyes behind the camera. She wasn't even trying to hide it. Carlos ran. He didn't walk. He ran across the field to his father, and when he reached him, he grabbed his arm and wouldn't let go. Manuel climbed down from the tractor seat, slowly, like his legs were remembering how to be still. He stood on the ground and put his hand on the warm iron side of the machine. It was vibrating gently, the last of the steam settling. "You did it, old man," he said quietly. Gerald and the judges came forward and measured. They measured twice. They conferred. And then Gerald turned to the crowd with a microphone. "The distance has been confirmed," he said. "The 1912 steam tractor has cleared the full course. Both machines completed the course, but on total accumulated distance across all rounds by a margin of 14 inches. He paused. The crowd was vibrating. The Rivera tractor wins. The 14 inches that decided everything would become part of the story people told for years. Not the horsepower, not the technology. 14 inches. The length of a man's forearm, the width of a shoebox. 14 inches in a contest that involved 8,000 pounds and 100 years of iron. Richard Caldwell stood near his truck. His crew was quiet around him. He stared at the field for a long time. His jaw moved like he was working on something he couldn't quite swallow. Then he walked across the field toward Manuel. The crowd watched. You could feel people tensing up. Carlos stepped slightly in front of his father. But Caldwell stopped a few feet away and looked at the old tractor for a moment before he looked at Manuel. "I've driven that machine of mine in 6 events," he said. "Never lost." Manuel nodded. He didn't gloat. He didn't say anything. He waited. Caldwell looked at him. "What do you have in that thing?" he asked. It wasn't angry. It sounded almost genuine. Manuel thought about it. "The same thing my grandfather had in him," he said. "The same thing my father had. You can't buy it. You can't engineer it." He paused. "It's stubbornness, Mr. Caldwell. Stubborn enough to believe it's not over until it's over." Caldwell looked at him for another moment. Then he extended his hand. Manuel shook it. It wasn't a dramatic moment. No music, no speech. Just 2 men in a field. One who'd learned something he hadn't expected to learn today, and one who'd known it all along. The story got big fast. Diana's footage was shared tens of thousands of times before midnight. By the following morning, it had been picked up by 2 national news outlets. The headline on one of them read, "100-year-old tractor beats 1,000 horsepower monster in Texas Challenge." Comment sections overflowed. People from across the country were writing things like, "This is the story we needed right now," and "This man is what hard work looks like," and "I showed this to my kids so they'd understand what I've been trying to tell them for years." Carlos was famous at school for exactly 1 week, which was both wonderful and overwhelming. His teacher asked him to stand in front of the class and talk about the day. He stood up, straightened his shirt, and said 6 words. "My dad didn't quit." That's it. The class was quiet for a second. Then his teacher started clapping, and the whole room followed. Manuel got calls from reporters, from companies wanting to feature the tractor, from a museum that wanted to put on display. He politely declined all of it. He had work to do. Planting season was coming. The land didn't care about internet fame. It only cared about showing up. But one evening, about 2 weeks after the challenge, Manuel found a letter in the mailbox from a man in New Mexico. The letter said, "My grandfather had a tractor like yours. He always said the machine was only as good as the man running it. I never understood that until I watched your video. Thank you." Manuel read it twice. Then he folded it carefully and put it in the small wooden box where he kept his most important papers. Richard Caldwell did something unexpected about a month after the challenge. He showed up at Manuel's farm on a Saturday morning. Alone. No crew. No fine clothes. Just a man in jeans and work boots, standing at the gate with a look on his face that was hard to place. Manuel saw him from the field and walked over. "Can I help you?" he asked. Caldwell held up a hand. "I'm not here to start anything," he said. I wanted to ask you something." Manuel opened the gate. They stood outside the shed, the old steam tractor visible behind them. "I've been thinking about what you said," Caldwell started, "about stubbornness." He paused. "I've been running that farm for 6 years. I bought every piece of technology available. My yields are strong. My margins are good. But I've got employees I barely know by name. I drive by my own fields, and I don't feel anything." He stopped. Manuel waited. "You work this land by yourself," Caldwell said. "You and an 11-year-old kid, and a machine that's older than my grandfather, and you feel something I've never felt." Manuel was quiet for a moment. "What do you feel?" Caldwell asked. Manuel looked out at the rows. "Grateful," he said simply. "Every morning I get to do this, I'm grateful." Caldwell nodded slowly. He looked at the ground for a moment. "I'd like to learn," he said quietly, "if you're willing to show me anything." It was the most honest thing Richard Caldwell had said in years, maybe in his life. And Manuel Rivera looked at this man who'd laughed at him and his tractor and said, "Come back Tuesday. I'll have coffee ready." Tuesday came, and so did Caldwell. He brought nothing except himself and a willingness to listen. Manuel started from the beginning, not the technical beginning, but the real beginning. He walked Caldwell to the edge of the east field and crouched down, took a handful of soil and held it up. "Feel this," he said. Caldwell crouched too. He took the soil in his hands. "What am I feeling for?" he asked. "Whatever it tells you," Manuel said. Caldwell looked at him, unsure if this was serious. It was. They spent 3 hours that Tuesday morning walking the land. Manuel talked about drainage and soil depth and which corners flooded and which ones dried out too fast. He talked about the way certain weeds told you things about what the soil was missing. He talked about the way the light fell on the field in early morning and what that meant for timing the work. Caldwell asked questions, real ones, not the kind meant to impress, the kind meant to understand. Carlos came home from school that afternoon and found the two of them in the shed. Manuel showing Caldwell the boiler on the old tractor. "This is Carlos," Manuel said. "My son." Caldwell looked at the boy. "I've heard a lot about you," he said. Carlos looked at his father first, as if asking permission to trust this man. Manuel nodded slightly. Carlos shook Caldwell's hand and said, "Nice to meet you, sir." That small moment, that transfer of trust from father to son to stranger, felt like a beginning, not just of a conversation, but of something that might last. Word spread through Castroville that Richard Caldwell was spending time at the Rivera farm. People weren't sure what to make of it. Some assumed it was business. Some assumed it was guilt. Rose at the diner said it plainly. Whatever it is, the man is learning something. She was right. Over several weeks, something shifted in Caldwell. He started showing up to his own farm differently. He walked rows instead of driving them. He started learning the names of his employees. He stopped treating every problem like an engineering challenge to be solved with money. Not every change was dramatic. Some of them were small. A conversation held instead of cut short. A decision made slowly instead of immediately. A moment on the land simply noticed without a phone in hand. Manuel didn't comment on these changes. He just kept doing what he'd always done. Showing up, working, taking care of his land and his son. But Carlos noticed something. He came to his father one evening while they were washing up before dinner and said, "Mr. Caldwell looks different lately." "How so?" Manuel asked. "Less like he's in charge of everything," Carlos said. "More like he's part of it." Manuel dried his hands and thought about that. "That might be the smartest thing you've ever said," he told his son. Carlos shrugged. "I just watch people." Manuel looked at his 11-year-old son and thought about how the boy had grown up watching him. Every early morning, every hard season, every repair made with not enough tools and not enough money. And he thought, if that's what the boy learned from watching me, then I did something right. There was one afternoon that Manuel would remember for the rest of his life. A Thursday in early October. The air had finally started to cool. The harvest was nearly done. Carlos was helping load the last bins when the boys suddenly stopped and pointed toward the road. "Dad," he said. Manuel looked up. Coming down the road was a truck he didn't recognize. Old, beat up, Texas plates. It pulled up to the gate, and an elderly man got out slowly. He was maybe 75, thin, moving carefully with a cane. He walked to the gate, and Manuel went to meet him. "You Manuel Rivera?" the man asked. "I am," Manuel said. The man nodded. "My name's Aurelio Garza. I saw you on the news." Couldn't stop thinking about it. He looked past Manuel at the tractor, still visible in the open shed. "My family had one like that," he said, his voice going quiet. "A 1910. We lost our farm in 1982. Manuel said nothing. He let the man talk. "We had to sell everything," Aurelio continued. "The land, the house, the machine. I watched them take it away on a flatbed." He was quiet for a moment. "But when I saw your tractor on TV, pulling that load, I thought, that's what we were. That's what we had." He looked at Manuel. "Can I see it?" Manuel opened the gate without a word. He walked Aurelio Garza to the shed and let him stand beside the old steam tractor for as long as he needed. The old man put his hand on it the same way Manuel did, slowly, like touching the past. He stood there for almost 10 minutes without speaking, and then he simply said, "Thank you." The harvest was the best in 5 years. Manuel couldn't fully explain why. The weather had been the same. The soil hadn't changed. He'd done nothing dramatically different with the planting, but the yields came in higher than expected, as if the land itself had responded to something. He didn't say this out loud, because it sounded like the kind of thing people would smile at politely and not believe. But he felt it. There was a quality to those autumn weeks that was different from others. A steadiness, like everything had found its right weight. Carlos helped with every stage of the harvest. He was 11, but he worked with the focus of someone much older. He'd learned to drive the old tractor in a straight line, without drifting. He knew which levers to pull and when. He could read the basic pressure gauge. Manuel taught him everything with patience, repeating things without frustration, never making the boy feel slow. One afternoon, Carlos drove the tractor down a full row by himself, while Manuel watched from the edge of the field. The boy was focused, hands steady, eyes forward. When he reached the end and turned around, he was grinning. He jumped down and ran back to his father. "How was that?" he asked out of breath. Manuel looked at him with an expression Carlos hadn't seen before. Not pride exactly. Something deeper, quieter. "Your grandfather would have loved to see that," Manuel said. Carlos looked down for a moment. "Tell me about him," he said. And so Manuel did. Standing in the field as the sun went down, he told his son everything about the man who'd come before both of them, the man who'd started all of this. Manuel's father had been named Ernesto Rivera. He'd come to Texas from Coahuila, Mexico, when he was 19 years old. He spoke almost no English. He had $42 in his pocket and a letter of introduction to a farmer in Behar County who'd promised him work. He worked that farm for 7 years, saving everything he could. He slept in a bunkhouse. He ate what he could afford. He sent money home to his mother every month without fail. When he'd saved enough, He bought 22 acres of difficult land that nobody else wanted. He cleared it himself, built a small house over 2 summers, and then he found the tractor. It was sitting in a barn on land being sold off by an estate. 1912, steam-powered. The family selling it wanted it gone. Ernesto paid what he had for it, which wasn't much, but it was enough. He taught himself how it worked over one entire winter. By spring, he was planting. He farmed that land for 40 years. He raised Manuel and his 2 siblings on it. He never got rich. He never became famous. He never made the news. He died at 71, in the house he'd built, on the land he'd cleared, with his boots near the door. He'd left Manuel a handwritten note. 1 page. The last line said, "The land will always give back what you put into it. So will people. Don't stop putting in." Manuel had read that note so many times the paper had softened at the folds. He kept it in the wooden box, next to the letter from the man in New Mexico. Some things are worth keeping. November brought cold nights and quiet days. The farm settled into its winter pace. Less urgency, more maintenance. This was the time of year Manuel liked for thinking. He'd walk the empty rows in the morning, coffee in hand, and just be in the space without needing to do anything to it. Carlos was back to full school days, homework at the kitchen table each evening, the usual rhythm of a boy's age. But something had changed in the boy since the challenge. It was subtle, hard to name. He asked different questions now, not just, how does this work, but why does this matter? He'd started a notebook where he wrote things down, observations about the farm, things his father had said, ideas he had about the land. Manuel found it once by accident on the kitchen table. He didn't read it. He put it back exactly where he found it, but he felt something about the fact of its existence. His son was building a record of their life. A boy 11 years old, writing down the things he didn't want to forget. Manuel thought about his own father, about how much he wished he'd written things down when Ernesto was still alive. Every story, every lesson, every evening on the porch. He hadn't done it. He thought there would be more time. There was never more time. One evening, he sat down at the kitchen table across from Carlos and said, "That notebook of yours, keep writing in it." Carlos looked up. "You saw it." "Just the cover," Manuel said, "but keep writing." Carlos nodded and wrote one more thing before closing for the night. By the time December arrived, the story of the tractor challenge had faded from the internet the way these stories do, replaced by the next thing and the next. But in Castroville, it hadn't faded at all. It had settled into the place where towns keep their important stories, the ones that become part of how they see themselves. Rose at the diner had added a photo to the wall behind the counter. Manuel and Carlos standing beside the old tractor after the challenge. Beside it, she'd written in marker, "Our kind of people." One afternoon, a group of students from a school in San Antonio came to tour the Rivera farm as part of a local history project. 23 kids, a teacher, and 2 chaperones. They piled out of 2 vans and gathered around the shed while Manuel stood in front of the old tractor and talked. He wasn't a natural speaker. He didn't use fancy words. He just told the truth about his grandfather who'd cleared the land, about his father who'd built the house, about how farming wasn't glamorous or profitable most of the time, about what it meant to care for something over a long time. The kids were quiet in a way that teachers rarely see. Not bored quiet, genuinely listening quiet. A girl near the front raised her hand and asked, "Were you scared before the challenge?" Manuel thought about it. "Yes," he said honestly. "But I've learned that scared doesn't mean stop. It usually means this matters." The teacher wrote that down in her notebook. Several kids did too. Carlos, standing at the back, watched his father hold a room without trying, and he thought, "I want to be like that." This is Addictive Stories, and before we get to the last chapter, let's take a breath, because what this story is really about isn't a tractor. It's not about a challenge or a prize or 14 inches of distance in a field. It's about what gets passed down. Not money, not land, though that matters too, but the thing inside the person, the way they face a problem, the way they treat the work, the way they wake up before the sun, because there's something worth waking up for. Manuel Rivera didn't win, because his machine was better. He won because he understood something about his machine that its builder never intended. He understood that care is a form of power, that attention is a form of fuel, that a thing maintained with love over generations carries more than its original design. And Carlos saw all of this every day of his 11 years. He didn't get it from a speech. He didn't get it from a story. He got it from watching, from being handed a wrench and standing in the shed at 9 o'clock at night, from eating a foil-wrapped sandwich beside a steam tractor on the morning of the hardest day, from hearing his father say, "We're still standing," like those words were the only scoreboard that mattered. We live in a world that is always telling us to upgrade, replace the old with the new, throw away what doesn't perform. But Manuel Rivera kept the old man running, and the old man kept him, and neither of them quit. Not once, not ever. That's not a coincidence. That's a choice, made over and over, every single morning. Spring came back to the Rivera farm the way it always does. Quietly, slowly. Green at the edges of the brown rose first, then spreading inward. Manuel was in the shed before sunrise on the first warm morning, checking the tractor, the boiler, the valves, the pressure fittings, all the things he checked every year at this time. Carlos came out in his school clothes at 6:30 and stood in the doorway of the shed. "You ready?" the boy asked. "Almost," Manuel said. Carlos walked in and stood beside him. He was almost as tall as his father's shoulder now. He'd grown over the winter. Manuel handed him a wrench. The boy took it without needing to be told where to use it. They worked together for 40 minutes, side by side, father and son, the steam tractor and the morning light. When they were done, Manuel stepped back and looked at the machine. Old iron, rust on the edges, steam ready behind the pressure gauge. It was not fast. It was not modern. It was not impressive to people who didn't know what they were looking at. But it pulled 8,000 pounds across a field and won. It would plant this season's rows with the same quiet stubbornness it always had. Manuel put his hand on the side of the machine one more time. "Thank you, old man," he said. Carlos looked at his father. "For what?" Manuel turned to his son. "For everything it taught us," he said. He shut the shed doors, picked up his hat, and walked out into the morning. Carlos followed. The field was waiting. The work was there, and neither of them would be anywhere else.